Introducing Monique Bégin. Monique Bégin is a woman of wondrous and diverse talents, skills, and accomplishments. As such, she has a multitude of titles that reflect her life, her passions, her commitments, and clearly denote her as the Canadian icon that she is. She began life as Bambino Bégin, born in Rome to a French-Canadian father and Belgian-Flemish mother, the eldest of 7 children. She grew up in a home that nurtured and valued intellect, culture, social justice, and good food. She became Mademoiselle Bégin in Paris, where she lived with her family until they fled the German invasion, ending up in Montreal. She came to Canada as a Canadian, but also as an immigrant and as a refugee. She was quintessentially Canadian from the start. She was Maîtresse Bégin as a grade 3 and kindergarten teacher in the mid-50s, no doubt the learning ground for her patience and her resilience. In the mid-60s, she became Ms. Bégin, a feminist who has inspired and mentored generations of Canadian feminists and feminists around the world. Among a host of feminist accomplishments, much too long to list, she was the co-founder of Fédération des Femmes de Québec, Executive Secretary of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, and the first person to hold the joint Carleton University of Ottawa chair in women's studies. In her first year in that position, 1986, Ms. Bégin audited an undergraduate course in women's studies, taking classes with the students to make sure that she was up to date on what they were learning and what they were thinking. That is the kind of unassuming, engaged, committed, feminist, woman, person Ms. Bégin is. The Honourable Monique Bégin was first elected as a federal member of Parliament in 1972, one of the first 3 women from Quebec to be elected to the House of Commons. Serving until 1984, she was re-elected many times, the last 2 times with the largest majority in Canadian history. As Minister of National Health and Welfare, she brought in important pension reforms, sponsored the child tax legislation, credit legislation, made major improvements in healthcare for Aboriginal peoples, and under the Canada Health Act, she strengthened and affirmed Canada's commitment to universality, accessibility, and comprehensiveness. As an MP, she was a beloved, effective, unrelenting champion of Canadian values. Her first honorary doctorate was awarded to Dr. Bégin in 1977. For a woman with a searing intellect who has contributed so hugely and importantly to the health and welfare of Canadians, these honorary doctorates, of which this morning is the 18th, have multiple meanings and significance. Dr. Bégin is many times and in many ways a doctor. A professor in various institutions since 1985 and in multiple different departments, Professor Bégin is an embodiment of multidisciplinarity. Fittingly, she had the title Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa for 7 years. She has many, many more awards and honors, and thereby more titles. She is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada since 1996. She is an Officer of the Order of Canada, awarded in 1997. She is a member, an honorary member, a lifetime member of innumerable organizations. She has the formal title of mentor in relation to her work with the Trudeau Foundation and the Order of Canada program. But in every job and every place, and along with every title, she has been a mentor to all those around her and beyond. Finally, while I do not think she has been formally granted the title of chef, her culinary skills are legendary and her dinner invitations the object of much envy. Underneath all the titles, she is Monique Bégin, a humble, charming, politically and socially active, eclectic, deeply committed, much loved, much celebrated Canadian, whom Carleton University is proud to honor today. Madam Vice-Chancellor, in recognition of outstanding contribution to the lives of Canadian women and accessibility to the Canadian healthcare system for all, I request you confer the degree of Doctor of Laws, honorary causa, upon Monique Bégin.
By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Faculty Senate and the Board, it is a privilege and a personal pleasure to bestow upon Monique Bégin, who is a friend and a mentor and an inspiration to all of us, the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges thereto pertaining. Congratulations, Dr. Bégin.
Madam President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Runte, members of faculty, graduates of the Faculty of Science, families and friends of the graduates. I'm particularly touched to receive this high honor from Carleton, having been, as was said, professor here in women's studies for 4 years after leaving politics. So my sincere thanks to all for today's recognition. That I would be receiving this honor from your Faculty of Science presents a challenge for me, a social scientist, for we know that all science is either physics or stamp collecting. It's at first intimidating for a sociologist to be in public office when so much of the minister's portfolio is made of the natural, the physical, the biomedical, even the earth sciences or maths and stats. I recall, I have to admit, making a fool of myself one Friday at question period. An arrogant, young, but senior MP from the prairies had to lead the questions for his party. Out of the blue, he asked me in a super moralizing, strong voice why I had not warned Canadians that eating peanuts were cancer-causing. Jimmy Carter was the American president. Peanuts come from Georgia, as you know. I had not heard a thing, despite our excellent departmental early warning system. So I took a risk and answered that he should not alarm the population and that there was no problem. He came back twice with more. And when will I ban peanuts import because of cancer? Finally, I repeated there was no such problem and encouraged Canadians to eat plenty of peanut that weekend because it had vitamin D, the sex vitamin. The house broke out laughing, but the department received 200 letters from scientists from all over the country saying the minister didn't know what she was talking about. It was not vitamin D, but vitamin E. But some of you, on a more serious note, will work with in government, federal, provincial, or other, or be consultants to people in office. Good public policy is based on knowledge, on solid knowledge, on good science. It must be evidence-based. Let me share with you a little about encounters between a minister and her scientist. In this case, the hard science experts of national health and welfare. In my time in the Canadian government, departments all had a research and planning branch. Mine was superb, and I much enjoyed working sessions with them. Their knowledge and our discussions informed the development of social policies. There also was an important health promotion branch responsible for a drugs directorate, an environmental health one, a food directorate, and so on. In addition, I was the minister of the Medical Research Council, which became our current 13 Canadian Institutes for Health Research. Scientists don't go to seek a minister's advice. They distrust politicians and don't want any interference in their work. They come to see the minister only when they're stuck with a problem, or for which science is still uncertain, or for more money. Two cases come to my mind, that of saccharin and that of urea formaldehyde foam insulation, UFI, two products I had to ban. In the 70s, some studies had demonstrated that sodium saccharin was carcinogenic in laboratory rats. The department scientists came to see me. I listened, then set up an international panel of experts, studied their report, inconclusive, and decided to protect the public from exposure to a potentially harmful substance to ban saccharin in 1977. It was then delisted as a food additive in Canada, although restricted access as a tabletop sweetener was maintained. And you can figure out that at the next WHO General Assembly of Health Ministers, I was teased to no end. As far as I know, and in the light of current studies, the ban is being reconsidered and will probably be lifted soon. In 1980 came the infamous case of urea UFI. During the 70s, when we made efforts to improve home insulation in Canada, UFI became a very important insulation product. Most installations occurred between 77 and 1980. Unfortunately, UFI was often improperly installed or used in locations where it should not have been. Enough complaints of unspecific allergic reactions were received, particularly from people living in small, well-sealed homes, that I was faced with a problem. Again, the science was quite unclear as to what could be the possible health implications. So, if my memory serves me well, I resorted once more to an outside independent scientific committee. The case went to cabinet because of the major economic consequences involved on the industry and on individual homeowners who saw their house devalued instantly. In the end, the use of UFI was banned. In both cases, banning saccharin and later banning UFI for insulating houses, the officials and myself applied, without knowing the words, what became known as the famous Principle 15 of the 1992 Rio Declaration, the precautionary principle. Essentially, a tool for risk assessment and decision-making developed to deal with scientific uncertainty in matters of environmental and health sciences issues. The precautionary principle is now implemented by big corporations and agencies such as the European Commission. In a sense, the precautionary principle is a rigorous ethical process developed for difficult decision-making in policy matters based on expressed values, including dialogue with and accountability to those affected by the problem. A few years after I left politics and joined academic life, I discovered how science, and I should almost say I discovered that science was neither neutral nor objective. Despite my usual critical mind, I admit I was shaken. It became even more evident during my time working in women's studies. It won't surprise anyone to recall that women, up until very recently, were excluded from the samples of hundreds of clinical trials. Researchers, and I heard that said in front of me, considered, I quote, women's plumbing system in the way. With scientists still concluding that the results applied to both sexes. It caused serious damage to many, many women's health. Just think of misdiagnosed cardiovascular diseases and female patients being told, don't worry, it's your heavy purse that gives you that pain. Just because symptoms like chest pain do not manifest themselves in the same way in men and women. Since the 90s, fortunately, excellent guidelines for bias-free scientific research have been developed. A key name is that of Margaret Eichler, which do apply to any scientific protocol. Now, instead of pitting hard science against soft science, the real major challenge for scientists today is integrative science. Hard science paying attention to, exploring what I call the internal logics of, and learning to work with soft science, what is also called interdisciplinarity. I observed only too often that when medicine referred to interdisciplinarity, it meant biology talking to microbiology or immunology. That's not at all what I have in mind. Developing integrative science implies making the effort to communicate with colleagues of different galaxies, a skill scientists also lack and need to improve when working with policymakers, the media, and others in general. Finally, a word regarding what I'm involved with these days. Canada Without Poverty and the Canadian Index of Well-Being, and whatever you graduates will be moving into. If you want to advance knowledge for the common good, you have to overcome the silos within which you move and of which you are a prisoner. Don't be afraid to get involved. Let me borrow, to conclude, from Elie Wiesel. Indifference to me is the epitome of evil. Thank you.